We noticed one of the themes of this this panel this morning is folks from Ireland. So both John and myself, our grandparents came over from Ireland, and with Margaret, she came over. Her family came over more recently. Margaret herself, was born in Ireland and married an Irish American, which may or may not have been a good decision. My wife will be around later. She's our Twitter person, so she might argue with that assessment. All right. Okay, so Margaret founded Whelan Advisory in 2014 to offer a highly tailored and transparent approach to investment banking for home builder, construction company clients. Having participated in transactions representing over $20 billion in capital raised, she's an industry expert leveraging a deep knowledge of industry drivers, participants, valuation, and financing alternatives. Margaret is passionate about the opportunities for innovation across the U.S. housing industry, and recently, her firm has advised and raised capital for several of the more progressive companies in the industry, including Integra, RCI, Thomas James Homes, Thrive Home Builders, and Tricor. Please give Margaret a warm welcome.
Good morning, everyone. John, you asked if we had anything to disagree with you, to be open about it. So I'm hoping these trends don't continue with the kids staying in the house, the in-laws coming to live with you. That sounds like hell for me. One of the reasons I have 4 children. Well, I'm Irish, right? We're a prolific group. But one of the reasons I'm so passionate about affordability, innovation, is because I think we owe it, as our industry, all of us in the room, we owe it to the next generation to fix some of the problems that are out there. So I was asked to talk about financing, show me the money, and if I can, I'm not that tech savvy, but if I can figure this out, we'll do that. Great. So John and I have been collaborating for about 20 years. We actually were both speaking at a conference together last week, and I got to see a bit of his presentation. I changed some of my slides so it wouldn't be too repetitive. What I wanted to recommend for all of you in the room, because I find this subject around innovation is very overwhelming, what I recommend is thinking about each new opportunity that's discussed. Is it a product? Is it a process? Or is it something that is a combination of both, and that's a vertically integrated total solution? I also think we almost need a glossary when we have conversations with each other, because a lot of people use specific words in different ways. Whether it's modular or prefab, it can have a very different connotation. And actually, when I was here last year for the first time, I thought IWBC, I thought the I was for international, because there were so many global perspectives in the room. So it wasn't just the way we needed a glossary, but people are actually speaking different languages as well. So you can't have a PowerPoint about what's going on in the U.S. construction industry without referencing, excuse me, the Mckinsey Report, of course. And when they came out in 2017 with this huge industry observation, it was very thoughtful, because it really crystallized what's going on, what's been happening or not happening, and what needs to change. In particular, they identified our industry as, within the U.S. construction industry is least digitalized globally, but within the U.S. itself, that our industry is in the bottom of the 4th quartile. We're below farming and agriculture in terms of digitalization or innovation. And so we're not just lagging what's going on internationally, but we're also lagging here in the U.S. When you think about the 25 years of history that the McKinsey Institute focused on, essentially what they were saying, and Art, you showed this slide in a different format, but that other industries have improved their productivity by about 2x over 25 years, and we have gone back 1. So in an environment where the rate of change is accelerating and things are improving so quickly, our industry is not improving slowly, we're actually going backwards. That means we have negative value for the consumer. We're expecting the consumer to pay more for a product that they're going to not get as much use of. So when you think about the house that you're living in, or that you can buy. And maybe one of the reasons people are using Airbnb or staying in rental homes or staying in apartments for longer is they really don't see the value. They want to buy the iPhone 10 and they show up at the new home sales community and the BlackBerry is for sale. These millennial kids, they don't want to buy our houses. They also don't want to work in our industry. So we have to think through all of the opportunities to get more people into the industry so we have more diversity and more ideas. The summary of this slide from McKinsey was that our industry invests about 1% of revenue every year in innovation, 1%, and on average nationally, corporates, public companies invest about 5%. So we're massively underinvesting, and that's why we're not getting any results. But I really do want to be positive. I think it's great that we're all here. I think we all talk about the problems, and let's stop talking about the problems, and let's focus on the solutions. John referenced a lot of the trends. I got to see him speak last week, so I put these slides together, which is my take on some of the trends he mentioned. So, for example, he talked about how strong the home builders are today, 20 national home builders, how robust the balance sheets are and the cash flow that they have. What was very interesting to me over the last 20 years is that they've gone from having 20% market share to closer to 40%. They're driving that through being concentrated in different markets from their peers or through acquisitions. The cycle itself is helping them. About 60% of home buyers live in 3 states. So you've got 20% in California, 20% in Florida, high teens in Texas. So that means that the builders in a solid economic background, not too hot, not too cold, with these huge balance sheets and cash flow positions, they could actually open their own factories. They could write a $25 million check that could produce 5,000 new home kits out of a factory, similar to what Integra is doing. Or they could partner with peers like BMC ReadyFrame to do that. But there's absolutely opportunity to collaborate, set a radius of maybe 200-300 miles and reach tens of thousands of houses. This is another take on one of the slides that Art had mentioned earlier in terms of the productivity and the lack of availability of both labor and skilled labor. And the biggest challenge here is that the lack of availability is not going to change. So the industry has changed in 2 ways. One is in the US, we haven't done a good job of attracting young people into our industry. So we talk and say, oh, it's not digitalized. What does that mean? It means when you go to a job site, the people are using paper. They're printing plans and sharing ideas. They're not using software. Have you seen young people in university these days? They don't even have notepads. Everything is done online. So we have to digitalize to attract them into our industry. My view is that diversity of ideas is going to help us more than anything else. And the big challenge that we have is that we're not bringing young people into the industry early enough, and the rest of us are aging out. So what you're seeing is the baby boomers are retiring, but we haven't done enough to bring people in. I stole this slide from Brendan, and Art stole my slide of Noah's Ark, so I guess that's okay. Brendan made this really interesting point that I had never thought about at this conference last year about the Mexican population changing so much in the 1960s when contraception was introduced for the first time. The trend is that the average family went from having 7 children to having 2. The reason that's so important is because there were skilled artisans coming out of Mexico who were very proud to do construction with their toolkits, with the values that they had. They were passing that along from generation to generation. So that's gone, and it's not just that we don't have labor, but not having skilled labor. The difference between someone who's skilled and unskilled is very hard to make up for. So, as John said, the builders are pivoting. They're building smaller homes, simpler homes, more clustered homes, more dense, so more, maybe 6 or 8 per acre versus 4 to 6. That's all in response to affordability. It's also in response to the consumer saying, I do not want to wait for 6 months or 8 months for my house to be ready. They're not used to waiting. And I came over from Ireland. I graduated from university in 1994. I was recruited by Merrill Lynch. I did a training program there. So I was straight into investment banking and straight into the construction industry. I remember NVR and the home builders quoting delivery times in days, because they were reporting every quarter their financial results, and they were saying, we're delivering in 40 to 45 days. And today, it's weeks. So going back to the negative productivity, what's frustrating is that when you talk to the builders and say, well, how do we go on average maybe from 50 days to over 100 days, what they'll tell you is of those 100 days, about half of them, the house is vacant. There's nobody working in the house. So the consumer is waiting. The home builder's cash is tied up. You have every motivation to get that house fixed faster and get it leased up or sold to get cash flow, but we just haven't addressed that with the software that is available to us. The multifamily industry does a much better job of it. The other thing the builders are doing is offering less options, less upgrades and elevations to make these homes simpler to build. And of course, the more frequently we're repeating anything, the more likely it can be automated. I've talked to some of the master plan developers that we raise capital for, and they tell me that there are builders within their community, so a big master plan could be 5,000 units, and you might have 8 or 10 builders. Some of the builders are closing one house per week, and some are closing one house per month. And what's the difference? The difference is the availability of simple product and automation. So we know that turnkey framing, which is subs like Ryan Molina I see in the room from ECG, who offer an install product. So they take the builder's plans, they build the house first in 3D, they rationalize the plans, reduce the waste, and then they bring that to the job site and install it often with a crane in a couple of days. The real benefit of turnkey framing, in my mind, is that the house is weatherproof faster, so you can get every other sub in more quickly behind them. Also, the level of precision is higher, so there's less need for rework. In terms of distribution in our industry, it's so inefficient, whether it's wholesale to retail, one-step to two-step, so little transparency in so many ways that things can get delayed and go wrong. I think the opportunity for technology to disrupt this is significant, and so that's something that people need to be focused on. The tech companies allow the data to be aggregated and shared more quickly. So we know that there are great benefits to construction, right? Whether it's reducing waste, reducing cycle time, creating a safer, healthier environment, maybe we can get more women into the workforce, but everyone is talking about it. The only obstacle so far is the access to capital, which I'm going to talk about next. I do want to mention one thing which I highlighted earlier, but the National Framing Council put out a report a couple of years ago, and they estimated that 30% of the materials that are being purchased to go into a new house end up in a dumpster. And again, I think all of us in the room have the opportunity to fix that. And the reason it's important is because who's paying for that? Is the customer paying for it? But also the millennials are very savvy and they're very focused on their carbon footprint. So this is not going to make them happy, and they're going to challenge you. If you're a builder in a master plan that is not using a turnkey framer, you have a dumpster out front. If you're a builder that is, it's usually a much smaller recycle bin. And in Europe, for example, where I come from in Ireland, you will get fined by environmental groups if you have dumpsters on site. So there's no option. We know this can be done. We're talking about innovation, but we're not really taking a lot of risk. Just take a flight over to Europe, over to Asia, see what's going on. So we have a view at my company that 2018 was the inflection point. A lot of it was around the way the capital is coming in, which I'm going to talk about next, but also the fact that everything was changing. The demand is steady and strong. The big players are more concentrated. They have more influence. The tech solutions are emerging with permanent capital. And then the fact that in California, they're mandating zero net energy ready by 2020. They actually softened on that. It was supposed to be zero net energy fixed, and now the companies only have to, or the houses only have to be ready, and then someone else will actually install it. But the good news is that most new rules come into California in our industry and then eventually translate to the rest of the country. So, show me the money. Going back to the McKinsey report, one of the observations they make is that all of the investments can be on a spectrum, so you can start small, but the more labor you're going to take out of the process, the more dollar it's going to cost. So if you're doing a full 3D modular mobile home type factory, it's going to cost a lot more than if you're doing something that's very simple. The reason that I look back at 2018 as the inflection point is you can see the peak in the investments coming in. So in the last 5 years or so that we've been counting this data, more than $5 billion have been invested into more than 500 companies. The first half of 2018 was the peak. Katerra was a part of that. And it tends to be lumpy. Capital can come in at different times within a cycle, but it's coming in strongly, and that's why I think that as the funding is there, that the adoption rate is going to increase too. It's not surprising to see that most of the capital, 37%, is in California. Not only do they need a lot of houses in California, but also the Silicon Valley investors are based there, so it's a quick trip for them to go and identify these investment opportunities. I like to look at the dollars and how they're being invested basically in 3 buckets. The first one is offsite construction, and I know we're going to hear from the chief architect at Katerra tomorrow. The second is software, Procore, allowing us all to communicate in the same language efficiently. And then the third one is artificial intelligence, which is actually fascinating. And when you see what it's done for other industries, the opportunity in construction is going to be terrific. I really like the message in this slide, which is that 70% of the capital in those 500 deals in the last 5 years is either angel or Series A. That means these are very small companies, they're very young companies. Over 80 investors have come in. It's not private equity money yet. Private equity firms tend to look for bigger transactions, substantial EBITDA, but these are the construction technology investors, and you can Google and find a list. It changes all the time. Usually, industries have a DNA for innovation. People within their companies who have the head of innovation title. If you look at the financial statements and the public documents for public home builders and construction companies, that title typically does not exist. There's no head of innovation, head of development. We're just starting to see it. But what's very interesting is that the opportunity for the corporates to invest is there. And Fifth Wall, which is one of the biggest venture capital funds, actually had 5 of the public home builders come in and invest in their second fund over the summer. So what the builders are saying is, we know what we don't know, but we're actually going to enable these folks to figure it out. And then as the companies get bigger and the dollars needed get bigger to keep these companies growing, the corporates will come in. John mentioned Integra. This is a company that we represented a couple of years ago. It's interesting. I took them on as a client because I'm from Ireland. Jerry McKay and I actually have the same degree. And they had worked with a different investment banker in the US, had not been successful. He called me, pushed me to take him on. 3 years ago, we didn't have this conference. This conference started last year. So 2 to 3 years ago, trying to sell this as an opportunity for somebody to come in was not easy. The market wasn't there. Louisiana Pacific, because they're a global company, had operations in Europe, had actually worked with Jerry and Gary, the founders of Integra, with their father on his business in Europe. They were interested. They took a call. We were able to sell half of the company for $45 million. This is a startup company with very little revenue and no forecasted profit for 3 years. So the capital is there. You just have to work hard to find it. If you haven't heard of Tony Seba, I recommend that you look him up. He is a Stanford University lecturer who focuses a lot on the opportunity for disruption in the energy industry and solar in particular. And he talks about what exactly is disruption and how long does it take. So the blue curve here shows you the stages of adoption. It tends to be slow and then to peak and then come down. Once you're over the top, you know that people are going to get it. Think about the iPhone as we were all moving along from the different phones we had. And then the yellow curve is just the adoption rate itself. It can happen slowly, unfortunately, in our industry. I think the shape of the curve is going to be very different. But the beauty of a slow adoption rate is the first mover advantage. So any of you in the room that find the capital to get these companies up and going have a significant competitive advantage before anybody catches up to you. We talk a lot about auto industry. I decided to provide a different take on it today because I knew what Art was going to be looking at with his slides. And so these are 2 grainy black and white photos. And the one on the left is from New York City, and it's in 1900. And if you look carefully, which is not easy to do, there's one automobile, and the rest is all horse and buggies. And so when you look at the second picture, it's 19. I want you guys to guess how many years from 1900 did it take to have 100% cars in New York City? At that time in the cycle, remember, the adoption rates would have been slower than they are now. We're not talking about Uber taking over so quickly. How many years do you think? 10? 13. Yeah, very close. 13 years. And what's very interesting is that everyone talks about the Henry Ford model and how it dramatically changed the industry. There are a lot of quotes that are attributed to Henry Ford, apparently, when you actually focus on them. Some of them he didn't say, but he got credit for it. But one of them is that if he had asked the customer what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. We wouldn't have got to automobiles. So what needs to change? I am a big believer in diversity, not because I'm an immigrant and because I'm a woman, but because I'm a curious person and I love to learn. And I read a ton because I travel so much, not just fairy tales to my kids, but I thought this was a really good quote, that the one thing that none of us can do is say, oh, I wouldn't have thought of that. Right, it's coming to these meetings, it's listening, it's taking lots of notes, it's checking them with your friends and really thinking about it. But the other thing is to really embrace diversity, which, because I get to sit in environments like this, and I don't mean to be offensive, I do usually get invited back, but there aren't a lot of women in our industry, we still have a lot of PMS. What do you mean? What I mean is pale, male, stale. Right? And Art, not to pick on you, but you showed 37 speakers this week and 4 are female. So you and I can work on that for next year, right? Set targets, measure, and then manage their performance. So the opportunity is just to get new people interested in these ideas, embrace the customers. Instead of talking about millennials, how about we have a panel of millennials and really listen to them? And that's one thing that I've done, and that it helps me to shape my thinking. So the last slide is the keys to success. I know a lot of you are here in the room because you have an idea, you're looking for capital. How do you figure out how to put it together? I think first, the diversity of thought, traveling overseas, because nothing we're talking about is really that innovative. It's just new to the US. Focusing on the long term and commitment, both the availability of capital, don't run out, that's my motto for all of my clients, but also the opportunity for doing things slowly and continuously. And in particular, if you can partner with a customer or a supplier in your industry who's there already, who's got some expertise, and leverage that, I think that's going to be very valuable. So hopefully I didn't go over. I tried to talk fast. Are we going to meet up here now? Yeah.